Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And I am very happy to welcome my guest today, who is Ren Koi. Hello, Ren.
Hi, Anna. How are you?
Very well. And the book that drew my attention to you, of course, is called All is One. And I believe that in this instance, there's no better place to start than with the title, All is One. Tell us.
So, suppose it was a little bit, well, a long journey to get to the writing of that book. And the title, All is One, is very much about, the subtitle is The Science and Spirituality of Consciousness. So it's very much an exploration into the idea of what consciousness is and how, for me, that ties in with my spiritual practices and the idea of a higher power. Something that I came to have faith in through the 12-step program as a result of being in recovery.
So this is, I felt with your book that it was an exploration of the idea of consciousness. And I really like the way that you take different interpretations and explore them and explain them as well. I also, I couldn't help but notice that you begin not by talking about this, but at some point in the book, you start talking about how the birth of your daughter got you thinking about this. So tell us about that, that journey that got you to here.
So I'd written a lot previously about my spiritual experiences and also my kind of exploration into the research of various religions and spiritual paths and traditions. And this book was not only a continuation of that research and that exploration and the stories of my own personal stories, but I wanted to juxtapose that with the science behind consciousness and kind of what science says currently about consciousness in order to see if there's any, things that don't match up or if there's things that do match up. And I suppose my bias was that I wanted it to match up. I wanted science and spirituality to I suppose what I argue in the book is that one day science will explain what spirituality has been saying for kind of many thousands of years. And that's the way that it seems to be going, in my opinion, in terms of quantum physics. It seems to be showing that, that everything is interconnected, that this kind of energy consciousness, if you want to call it that, is what pervades the universe, and that matter arises from that rather than consciousness arising from matter. So that was what I discovered really from my research into the science of consciousness. And the reason it was sparked off, it was kind of I suppose a series of things that happened. Firstly, my daughter was born, which was literally the week before we went into the first lockdown of the pandemic. So then, I mean, I didn't know at the time, but then I had more or less 2 years where I was at home. 18 months when I was at home. I was working. My job meant that I was working from home the vast majority of the time. Wasn't allowed out, in the evenings and stuff because of the lockdown. So it was the perfect opportunity to write this book. And it just struck me immediately, which is what I started writing about at the beginning of the book, that, this child of mine was clearly conscious, but it's very difficult to put your finger on what that means exactly. And she obviously had no, well, I presume she's got no recollection of any past, and she doesn't know about the future, and she was just kind of present all the time. And that really got me thinking about it. That really got me thinking about what is inside that tiny little person. And obviously I was one of those tiny little people, 40 odd years ago. So that was where the kind of exploration began.
I think it's, something that obviously has taxed humanity, this question of consciousness, from the beginning. And it's always saddened me the way that science has been so dismissive. And I say science as in the materialist scientists, which really take their approach to science as a religion almost. And I have heard scientists who are exploring this area talk about how they felt ostracized. At one point, it was consciousness is referred as the C word. So it's just obvious to me that maybe what we need is a modern language to describe the experience of consciousness and what it is. And it's modern language because we're used to, looking for evidence for everything and explaining it from a paradigm or through a paradigm where everything has to make sense and be proven, because that's the materialist approach which we've grown up with. And so to discover that there are scientists and that there is a movement within science that's breaking away from that, let's borrow the word scientism, is very refreshing, actually, and very encouraging.
I think that, when I approached writing this book, I was very conscious that the vast majority of people wouldn't just want to read about my experiences or other people's experiences. It's very important to give both sides of the story and to try to ground everything that, what can be classed as kind of like woo-woo and mystical. It's very important to ground that in something that people can kind of get their head around and understand in a material way, like you're talking about. And that's what I was trying to do. Now, I'm no scholar, and also these ideas, they're very, very intricate and difficult to get your head around. So my main aim of the book was to try to simplify those ideas so that this book was accessible to anybody, so that anybody could pick it up and get a fairly decent grasp of what quantum physics is trying to say about consciousness. It's easy to grasp, what spirituality says about consciousness, and it's easy and makes the book a bit more fun to listen to, to read my stories and think about synchronicity and things like that have affected me on my journey. So that was the aim, really, because I think that despite the fact that science doesn't really play that much of a role in my life when it comes to all this stuff, because I just think that, without sounding, too kind of reductionist about science, like it's the best guess at the time, isn't it, really, science? Like science is based on the data, but the data changes. We saw that with the pandemic. It was like this was the approach to the pandemic changed because the science changed, and the science on this subject, on consciousness, is changing all the time. So I think that although it is important, although I have a similar opinion to yourself, like I do see science as a bit of a religion that people kind of like put their entire faith into. I get why that is, because most people need something real that they can believe in. They need that kind of like level of comfort. Whereas what I've come to experience and I suppose believe and have faith in is the fact that it's not quite that simple, and there's always more to be revealed, if that makes sense. There's more, there's always more being revealed to me. It's like a perfect example. There's this this AI, the Google AI, the artificial intelligence. So 2 weeks ago the world discovered that potentially there is now a sentient artificial intelligence in the world, and that just throws everything like up in the air. Like everybody who contemplates this is kind of like thinking about it from different angles and perspectives. And even at the end of my book, I said I don't believe that artificial intelligence will ever become sentient. So if this is real, then obviously it puts everything that I've been writing about into question. So, you know, this is what I'm saying is like your worldview can shift so dramatically if it's disproven or if something's proven.
I think what we could all use is a dose of humility to understand that we will never understand everything, and that that's okay, and that there's always something new, and that that's what makes it exciting. I think keeping the possibilities open is crucial, which is why I admire the work of many of the scientists who are delving into quantum physics, because they are embracing science in the original spirit of science, which was to explore and keep possibilities open and play with ideas and not treat anything as heresy, but as a springboard for exploration. So I think this is a very exciting opportunity to see people take that route. And as you say, you know, it's, you know, for some people, they need to have that certainty. They, you know, to go with what they've build on what they've learned. And that's understandable, as you say, because I think there are just, you know, no one is the same. There are different types of people. There are those who want to see a magic act and not know how it's done. And there are those who actually have to know how it's done. And the ones who just want to see the magic act actually feel a little bit cheated if they're told how it's done, because the joy is in the mystery. While others, no, it's a trick and they want to know how the trick was done, because there's something about not wanting to be tricked as well, I think, in some way. So we can talk about it as how trusting, you know, some people are more trusting than others. We can talk about it in any terms we like, but the bottom line is different people, different approaches.
Yeah, I love that analogy that you just gave then, because I'm the one who wants to know how the trick is done, which is the reason why I write and I research and I want to know what reality is. But I am beginning to change and become more. After writing that book, I've become more comfortable with the idea, like you just said. Then we're never going to know everything, and I've become more comfortable with the idea of not knowing and of just being and just experiencing. And something that you said earlier, which I thought was perfectly captured, the kind of the point of all this is it is like we need a new language in order to explain everything, and I don't think that language can explain it. Like the language that we speak cannot explain the experiences. Like, and the word experience means experience, doesn't it? You have that experience. So if I have a spiritual experience, for example, and then I try to tell you what my spiritual experience was, you will understand, because you didn't have that spiritual experience, and vice versa. You try and tell me about your spiritual experiences, we might find some common ground. But you know, I've had these spiritual experiences under the influence of psychedelics. So I had this massive spiritual experience with ayahuasca, and the only way that I can communicate that, I mean, I wrote a book about it called Together, an ayahuasca experience, and how I communicated it in that book was you know, if I had to say it to you now, I'd say the sensation of my body and of my ego completely disappeared, and I became one with the oneness of the universe. That is what happened. But that doesn't say anything really, you know, like you're sat there listening to that, and that doesn't mean that you know what happened to me. So it's about us having the experiences, and I think that globally, you know, maybe there will come a point in time in the future where there is some way that we can all have these experiences so that we will all know that we are one, you know, and then things will start to change. I mean, once you know that if I know that you are me and I am you, I don't want to do you any harm. You don't want to do me any harm. That's when things start to change.
Well, you know, you were talking about the limits of language in expressing or describing an experience. And I can tell you that I think it was 2 nights ago, because I've been taking individual crystals and meditating with them for periods of time so that I can understand what the crystal feels like, if I can put it that way. And I was working with green fluorite for the first time about 2 nights ago. And I keep a journal of what I experience. I didn't know what to write. I think if I remember correctly, the first word that the only word I could use was wow. That was it. That was the only word I could use to describe the experience. And then I thought, no, I need to write a little bit more so that I have an idea when I look back and I can, you know, remember something that triggers the memory. And the closest thing was, it felt like my whole rib cage was vibrating or humming. Now, you know, that's the closest I can come to it, but it feels short of the wonder of how it felt. And I wanted to write it down. I wanted to note it, because I don't know if the next time I do this, if it's going to feel the same. Because as we know, we are vibrating at different frequencies according to our mood, our health, you know, what kind of a day we had. And so I have no idea if I'm going to have that resonance with this crystal in exactly the same way again. I really hope so. I haven't had a chance to explore it yet, because it was 2 nights ago. I'm hoping to do that tonight. But it's language falls short of when we're in the face of magic. I think the things that fill us with awe and wonder, and so perhaps that's why we need to take it apart and see what's happening so that we can explain it, because we are, of course, our means of expression is language. And if we don't find a language that communicates the experience, and language is very linear unless we're using it in a poetic sense. It's very linear and it's very logical. It's very intellectual. It's analytical. It's we take things apart when we're using language, and so this is why. And it probably would be, and I'm just kind of playing with this idea, but I'm wondering, I guess, whether in societies where story is a means by which information is stored rather than written, or whether it's through pictures, maybe that's why they were closer to exploring spiritual paradigms than we have become, as we become much more reliant on a particular use of language.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is extremely difficult to get across how we feel about anything, isn't it? And that experience that you've just shared there proves that. And that's the difficulty almost in writing a book as well, because, you know, I'm conscious whilst I'm writing the book that, especially if I'm talking about one of my own experiences, I'm conscious of how to use language to create one of those pictures in the reader's mind. And that in itself, I mean, I'm not, I'm a self-taught author as well. So I just, you know, 5 or 6 years ago, I started writing, and the first book that I wrote was Addiction Prevention: 12 Steps to Spiritual Awakening, and that was more, talking about addiction and recovery, and how the 12-step program, I believe, could be used in schools to help children to improve their emotional intelligence. And it went from there, really. And then the next book that I wrote was more about my spiritual experiences. And every time I've written anything, I'm never happy with it. I always finish the book and then I read it, and then I go back to it months later and I think, well, that's terrible. I could have done that better, but that was the best I could do at the time. And I'm not the best verbally either. Like, I think I can communicate okay, but as my family, my loved ones will tell you, I can be terrible at communicating sometimes. It's very, very hard to find the right words all the time, and it's very, very difficult to get across how you're feeling, the vast majority of the time, because to get across how you're feeling, you've got to first know how you feel. And a big thing for me in my kind of life and in my recovery has been about learning progressively and getting, just slowly, step by step, better at kind of understanding how I'm feeling, and then being able to get that across to the people that I love, to the people that I work with. But it's really hard. It's really, really difficult. And it's by no means do I feel like I've achieved anything, other than the fact that, I've written this book and it got published, and now I'm hoping that it does well.
Well, many of the authors who I've had the privilege to speak to on this program, what they're all doing is they are sharing their experience of whichever modality they're exploring, in terms of spirituality and also mental health. So it seems to me that that's exactly what your book does. It says, well, this is where I am at the moment, and this is the journey so far. And from that perspective alone, it is worth reading, because we are all in this place of exploration. That's exactly what we're all doing. We're all learning, and the joy of doing this podcast is that we get to share where we are, how we got here, and learn from each other. So, reading your book will spark something up in me and get me excited and start thinking in a particular way, beginning a new train of thought. That is true communication. So I think I would say, stop worrying about whether or not it's good enough. It is actually more than good enough, because what you're doing is you're sharing your experience. The thing that you said, you felt you didn't want to just write a book about your experiences because you didn't feel that that was enough. Well, actually, the journey of discovery is part of your experience too. And I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, and in the previous books, I think I'd written, like, if you were to go back and read from my first book to the fifth book, which is the All Is One, it gives spanning those 5 books is the entire story of my life. The 10 years, well, previous to recovery, and then the 10 years, well, it's coming up to 12 years now of my recovery, and everything that I feel as though everything that I ever needed to say has been said within those 5 books. So there isn't a book in me at the moment until I had an interview recently, and I was saying that I've recently started to do jiu-jitsu in December last year, and I've realized that if I want to get a black belt, which is, I want to be a black belt, then I will have to commit to this for a minimum of 10 years. So I think that if I achieve the black belt, or when I achieve the black belt in 10 years' time, that will be when my next book will come out, I think, and to explain those experiences in between, because it's already taught me so much in such a short space of time. It's the same with the podcast as well. My Life in Recovery podcast was something that I did for 2 years, and I after 50 episodes, I stopped doing it, and then I missed it. I missed doing it for a few months, so I went back to it. And then I think I finished on 101 episodes, and I just felt as though I'd said everything that I could possibly say, because it was specifically about my life in recovery, and it was I felt as though all the conversations that I'd had were fantastic, but I was regurgitating the same stuff. So I'd made the decision to finish the podcast, and now somebody else has taken that name. So there's a lady running the Life in Recovery podcast now, and I've listened to a little bit of it, and she's great. So I'm like, cool, you carry on, you crack on with that, and that's wonderful. So now I'm doing nothing other than work, jiu-jitsu, recovery, family, and that is my life. Very, very simple. There's no social media. I've deleted all my social media. I don't engage with all the nonsense that's going on in the world that brings me down and makes me feel crappy about myself and everything that's going on around me. And actually, I disengaged from social media about 6 months ago, and my mental health has never been better. I can honestly say, I mean, it's not great for the book, because I can't promote it, but but for me personally, that was the reason why I did it, was because I was finding that, especially with the whole pandemic stuff, I was just like getting involved in conversations that weren't serving me, having my opinion on things that I didn't need to have my opinion on. And it was making me miserable, and I stopped it. And what I've realized is now that if something doesn't make me joyful and doesn't bring me joy and my family joy, then I don't do it.
Well, this is about following your heart. And I think it's at the heart, at the core of creativity. Because when you said, I don't have a book in me yet, it's usually, what that means is that you're in a process of collecting information. And so when you've collected enough, then that spark of inspiration gets lit, and you go, oh, okay, I've got something to share now. And I think that's the beauty of following your heart, is that you are led to that point, where you then have to share. It's the waxing and the waning of cycles and the moon, and wearing my astrologer's hat for the moment, then it's exactly that. You're in that phase that's just like it's a new moon. You've discovered jiu-jitsu, and now it's building up and building up and building up, and there will come a point at which is the full moon equivalent, the climax, and then there is the need to share what you've got. So I'm sure there is another book in there, because your life is not yet ended, and it seems to me that you enjoy sharing what you learn. So that's a beautiful thing. But I want to just come back to consciousness, and I wanted to get your take on it. So what does consciousness mean to you?
So I think prior to writing this book and the research that I did for the book, I would have maybe said that consciousness arises in the brain, that any animal or insect or anything that has any kind of brain will have some form of consciousness. And, there's kind of different degrees to the level of awareness of consciousness as well. But now I would say that consciousness is the precursor to matter. So I don't look at consciousness as being this, like if you said, oh, well, obviously we're conscious because we're self-aware. I would class it more as energy consciousness. So I would say that the basic building block of the universe is energy consciousness. And that energy consciousness vibrates at a certain frequency. And then as it vibrates at a lower frequency, it turns into matter, and then obviously matter creates the material universe as we know it. So that consciousness is within everything. So and this is the panpsychist idea, isn't it? That, and if you take it a step further and you go to kind of like a more, I suppose, mystical theory, pantheism would say that the universe is God experiencing itself. So God is the consciousness, and consciousness experiencing itself is what is going on in the universe. And I kind of buy into that, really, I suppose. But for the purposes of living a human life in this world, obviously our perception of things has to be the way that it is so that we can exist. But what science is telling us that this isn't real, which is exactly the same idea as Maya in the Hindu tradition. So what science is now telling us through quantum physics is that all this is our brains making sense of the energy consciousness. Because if all we could experience was the energy consciousness, it would be completely different, and at the quantum level, it is completely different. And that's very, very hard to get your head around. Like if I have this conversation with my mother, for example, she can't comprehend what I'm talking about. It's just way over her head. And it's difficult for me to comprehend as well. I'm not a scholar, I'm not a scientist. So I have to just kind of like take it, I read it, I regurgitate it in the book, and I have to kind of take it on faith as to what that means. But because I've had spiritual experiences, and I've had these experiences through psychedelics, I know what that means. So on an internal level, even though I can't verbally say it to you in exactly the way that I would like to, I know that that is what is going on in the universe. So that's what it means for me. And because I've written this book, and because as I've just said there, really, I've said kind of everything that I wanted to say on the subject, it's a nice place to be, really, because I don't feel like I have to keep talking about it anymore or keep writing about it, because it's there now. I can refer to my own book and actually read my own book and say, oh yeah, and kind of like remind myself of what it is that, that I kind of understand it to be.
I'm constantly gratified. It's a nice feeling, when I come across, quantum physics, and I think, oh yeah, that's Maya, and oh yeah, and it's like, oh, do we really need to reinvent the wheel? Yeah, we do, for all the reasons we've already said before. We're looking for a language to explain and express. But it's also very liberating, because if we take the idea that what we're experiencing as reality is only real because you and I believe and are interpreting what's happening as being this conversation, it means that we are free to create fantastic and exciting realities. And that's, I think that's something to embrace.
100%. And what I was just thinking of as you were saying that then is, the default mode network in the brain, once that shuts off, you experience everything completely differently. So people have these experiences where, whether it's by an accident or whether it's through activation through meditation or some sort of spiritual practice, where that default mode network either changes or completely switches off, and they have these immense experiences where their perception just massively increases. And in some cases, they get these huge downloads as well. When that happens and people share that, so as I said before, like, I'm sure you've had lots of spiritual experiences that you would share with me, and I share them with you. It reinforces the fact that what these spiritual traditions have been saying for thousands of years is real, is the truth of the universe. And as you said earlier on, they they created a picture of how the universe is. It's almost like we've forgotten. We knew what reality was, and it's been written down, and maybe people have taken it as, as parable rather than fact, and actually we've just forgotten what the truth is. And now we've come to a place where we're kind of like rediscovering what's already been said thousands of years ago. So hopefully the word humility that you used right at the very beginning, hopefully the scientific community will start to be humbled when they explain exactly what's already been said. And I heard recently there was a podcast, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it was a very famous quantum physicist, and basically he said that, we're actually coming to a place now where everything that was said in, the Bhagavad Gita and all these ancient texts, we're proving that is the case, and it is quite humbling. So, I think that's kind of like the new paradigm will be science and spirituality will meld, and hopefully we'll enter an age of enlightenment, which is, I think, what people like us are hoping for.
Yes, and I would say true enlightenment, rather than a limited enlightenment. So that would be a very exciting future to look forward to. So just a reminder that the book that we are discussing is called All Is One, and the link to that will be in the description box. If people wanted to learn more about your books and your work, how do they do that, Ren?
The best place is to go to www.o-books.com. My bio is on there, and the link to the book as well.
Great. And I'll be sure to have a link to that as well. So thank you very much for your time today and for your book.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful. Take care.
And thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.